Hello, welcome to week two. I want to start with wishing you all well and wellness and health. Looks like we're going to be doing this for a little bit, but I think the key to succeed this next several weeks together is communication. I've heard from some of you who are busy. I think there's one or two of you who I'm still wanting to hear from. But what I want to do is the reason for the one-on-one is I want to kind of just hear your questions, hear your concerns, uh, and just have some clarity of the direction of the class. That way you feel comfortable, you don't feel exasperated, you don't feel anxious. Some people have given into that anxiousness and have dropped the class. Other people, have stated that they don't perform with online, and I'm not treating this as an online class. I can barely figure out D2L. I and I've been dragging my feet on the online thing for years now. So I'm being forced to do this. So I'm gonna do my very best, keep it as simple as possible, give you the flexibility you need. Just don't let the work pile up. That's all. It's about taking little bites here and there. Anyways, let's move on. Lecture two. So lecture two, we're looking at page 10 through 17 on David Stannard's excerpts, American Holocaust. And the first thing you'll note in your outline is in number 2A is I quote the very beginning of what the Spanish were required to state before they would invade and destroy a native space, our native village, or our native society. And it says, I certify. Now, the reason why it's important to pay attention to some of these aspects of the reading is because Spain, despite the chaos of its society, they still had rules and regulations, laws, expectations, and whoever had the most power got to enforce those at whim sometimes. Of course, kings and queens were criticized for showing favoritism and with some people and disdain with others. But at the end of the day, when people got in trouble, there were supposed to be these laws. And so they created this as they invaded these spaces, these indigenous spaces. And one of these things is to come up with this warning that if Native people did not submit right away, they would be taken slave and destroyed, or in the minimum killed if there was any sort of resistance coming from them. Now, you'll of course these next 7 pages, 10 through 17, it's just more description of the horrendous treatment that Native people experience, particularly in the Caribbean. But this would be expanded across a period of time. The Nazi Holocaust imposed on people like the Jewish people, people who were mentally disabled, the Gypsies, their official name being the Roma. That happened within, I believe it happened within a short period of time, and because of its efficiency. Maybe that's one of its attractors, that it was so efficient to kill so many people in such a short period of time. Of course, we did not have the technology or know-how to be able to destroy people that quickly. But as he notes in the next part of the reading, is that Hitler was impressed of how the United States government, through policy, was able to exterminate people within short periods of time by different methods, and not necessarily directly through killing, but just setting up people where they would eventually, their quality of life would diminish and the mortality rates would shrink and die prematurely. So I guess this reading should give you a gist that this slaughter at times was planned. Stannard even quotes De las Casas of how Columbus was ill for several months, and his troops, his soldiers, just went on a rampage of murder and rape and pillaging. And then when he finally got better, it's not like he put a stop to it. He actually organized them. So you have on one side an organized group of people who are running around doing what they want, and then this man who's supposed to be responsible for these folks, or at least be their commander, gets better and actually organizes us to be able to carry more efficiently, to be able to get what they want, which is enrich themselves with whatever mineral resources or already natural resources. In this case, particularly the slaves, because that's kind of like the key. Somebody has to do the work, and these soldiers didn't come to do the work. They came here to help take, to be able to be the coercive, violent hand on behalf of the Spanish king and the queen, or whoever was invested, whoever was the investors in this trek that in regards to their invasion of the Americas, starting primarily in the Caribbean at the beginning. So, there's a couple of things that I also mentioned in the outline. For example, how they began to divide up the land. And I mentioned this in my 201, but I'd like to remind you, for you folks who are new. See, sometimes we think about our last names. I'm Cervantes, you're Rodriguez, Ramirez, Garcia. There's all kinds of popular last names. And what's interesting about it is that this encomienda system that was being imposed in the Caribbean and eventually taken to Mexico and Peru. This is basically like the rewards that they would give each other, right? In this case, the king, the queen, or whoever was a authoritative figure. They would, if your last name was Garcia, you said, well, you helped the king, you give him his fifth, which means he's fifth of the prophets, and now we're gonna give you a piece of land. But it's not just a piece of land. Whoever lives there is also yours to do what you want with. And most of these people was also going to be my slaves. And guess what? My slaves are also going to have my last name because they're my property. And so they try to escape. That's and they're going to run into another encomienda from another one of my colleagues who also participated in the murder and the rampage. So if if a native who's a slave of somebody whose last name is Garcia moves on to another encomienda, maybe to the Rodriguez encomienda, he might be returned. And in some instances, at least at the beginning of this encomienda system, people be branded. The people who lived in the land, the native people who lived in they'd be branded with a G, with an R, with a Cervantes maybe. You see, and so these last names we carry, we gotta maybe there's an exception to your case because immigration has been pouring into these continents for 500 years. So maybe your grandfather who came in and at the beginning, at the late part of the 19th, 20th century, somewhere in Mexico. But I'm just pointing out what happened at the beginning. Okay, so I don't want you to feel like I'm trying to make you feel bad about your last name. I'm just pointing out just this historical fact. Let's move on because I'm moving on to 10 minutes here, or at least 8 minutes plus. Okay, so other things, the context of what's being set up, this free-for-all murder rampage and rape and pillaging, is setting up a social milieu where the people who are the victims, nobody's coming to the rescue. And so they give into the sadness and depression. And when you're entered into those states en masse, some people are going to do some drastic things. Like he points out, some mothers are going to opt to drown their children. Some people are just going to commit suicide. The state of depression might even contribute towards you starving yourself to death. I mean, we see these cases even today, not necessarily at a massive level in numbers, but definitely we see people, who unfortunately, when they're afflicted by this, by their interactions with society as a whole and modernity, have a hard time coping. And imagine when you're living in an environment where you've seen your family being killed in front of you, being raped in front of you. Okay, it's bound to do something to your mind. The other thing I also want you to look at is the Catholic missions. If you go to California, you can still go as a tourist and visit Catholic missions. And if you're clueless about history, about what happened there, you're gonna think it was it's one of the neatest buildings you've ever been to, without you even knowing that it was native labor that built it, slave native labor. And what was the reward for those native people? It's like they were converted to a their ancestors were forced converted to that religion. Another thing that would happen in California is that since it was okay to kill natives, including the government of California, the territorial government of California allowed for and paid for native people to be either kidnapped into slavery or be murdered right there and then. And even the United States government managed to pay to distribute monies for that purpose. And I think you'll hear that in the video, because the homework question has interacts with this article, this part of the article in the video. Now, Standard makes throws a figure at you, which is 100 million. 100 million. We currently live in a country of 300 million people, and it took 300 million people. It took about 200 years to get to this point. I mean, we're 320 million people. 200 years to get here, and we think like, well, that's rapid population increases. Yeah, it is, but for the Americas, particularly for the Americas, for it to be, let's look at 10,000 years for that population growth to move on that way, to grow that way, and all of a sudden to collapse in a matter of 400 years. Uh, it's it's difficult to wrap our heads around that. Okay, and I'm introducing you to this article because, see, this is us, the majority of us, aka Chicano Latino people. We are the survivors of this impact, this huge demographic change and impact. And it is really important that we don't forget that, because systems of government need to be held to account. Just like Germans were held to account to pay Jewish people. And as far as I know, the Jewish people at least are being compensated for that crime committed against them. I haven't heard whether the Roma, aka Gypsy people, have been compensated. I haven't heard whether families of those people who were mentally disabled were compensated. But I know the Jewish managed to bring some justice, at least monetary justice, for themselves. What about Native people? What about the treaties? What about all those things? So this week I'm hoping to wrap up this. Well, we're gonna wrap it up and then start to move on to from Indians to Chicanos. All right, so I'll leave it at that, and thank you again. And my apologies. We're moving on to 13 minutes. Bye bye.